This video is sponsored by Surfshark. Everyone, I would like to demonstrate to you what Oscar Jack Piastri just did to the Formula 1 grid. I did not think that through, but you get what I mean. Okay, it wasn't a complete domination, him missing out Norris's pole just under a tenth, but that sprint pole, my goodness. I guess that video earlier in the week where he casually showed off how much he likes Spa was pretty useful after all. Now, of course, the sprint win was not afforded Oscar Piastri due to the fact that, put simply, his car did have a little bit too much suck. As in, not enough high top speed in which Max Verstappen was able to profit from. But nevertheless, this was a weekend which very much tipped the balance back in the Australians' favour, now 16 points ahead of Lando Norris in the championship. And we're about to head into Hungary, where of course Oscar got his first win 12 months ago, and now he's on the verge of almost getting into double figures. Blimey. And then on Sunday, he pretty much confirmed his thoughts that, hey, being second place in Q3 wasn't all that bad, because it did ultimately give him the draft that he needed, even with the rolling start, to be able to then get in to the first place position at Sector 2. And I will also point out for anyone disputing that yes, Lando Norris did have a battery issue, and then I believe Oscar had a few little complications battery-wise himself, but it wasn't as impactful as it was for the Brit. So there was a little bit of a helping hand there in terms of being able to have some sort of leeway at the start of the race, but nevertheless, Piastri was able to control it, because Oscar ultimately stayed in first place, and I can't tell you the amount of stress headaches I had throughout that entire race, because I'm not gonna lie, the decision for McLaren to put Lando on the hard tyres was a bit of a masterstroke, because no one else was trying it. We all have our feelings and opinions of the C1 tyre, that nobody really likes it, but in this case, Lando absolutely adored it, and was very much in a very good place to be able to get back at Oscar, because, well, the C3 tyres in comparison weren't going to be able to hold up, but yet with the Australian they certainly did. It was a very spirited fight back, and it certainly was quite infectious if the British commentators were anything to go by, because throughout all of this, as I was having to deal with a mini migraine, I had Crofty and Brundle in my ear going, and look at that! Here comes Lando Norris, he's about to get him! Even though he's 5, 6, 7, 8 seconds behind, and then a cursory, oh yeah, props to Oscar for the tyre management, but Lando's coming back! It's, oh god, laying it on a little bit thick in terms of the British bias, chaps. But nevertheless, you have to look at this as a McLaren victory. Yet another 1-2, and I think this is their first 1-2 at Spa since the turn of the century. It's been that long, their first win since 2012. But before we carry on, I would like to thank Surfshark for supporting today's video. I'm travelling overseas a little bit more this year, and I would like to make sure I still have access to things I need whilst I'm in the UK. If I were to fire up Surfshark, I can pick a London server. My internet would allow me to do things that I can still do up this ladder. Say if I wanted to watch some classic F1 documentaries, including the really cool one about Prost on BBC iPlayer, I wouldn't be able to do that once I left UK shores. One tap, new IP, problem solved. Surfshark even stops the pop-ups from getting in the way of your browsing, and stops others from snooping as usual. The app runs on unlimited devices, uses top-grade encryption, and keeps 0 logs so your browsing stays yours. So if you travel, study abroad, or work from unusual places like, well, I do, grab Surfshark with the code LawVS via surfshark.com/LawVS. You'll get 4 extra months free and a 30-day money-back guarantee. Cheers, Surfshark, because we gotta give credit to good old Chuck. Granted, in the sprint he did sit a lonely 4th behind the McLarens and Max, but it was still a good chunk of points for the team, making the most of the fact Mercedes scored nothing on the Saturday, and then Ferrari managed to pull away from them in second place with the race results they got. Because the sprint format certainly is something that Ferrari have done their homework in relation to after what happened in China, because the tweaks they made between the sprint race and qualifying did help them out immensely in being able to give Leclerc just enough race pace to be able to hold back a rampaging Dutchman, hoping to get at least 2 visits to the podium. That was denied Verstappen, and Charles Leclerc can be really proud of his achievements. And Ferrari were really a dab hand when it came to strategy and implementation this time out, after a shocking performance in Silverstone, where their GPS failed, and then Charles Leclerc, I don't know what that was about. And Charles himself was praising the efforts and the execution of Ferrari, despite the fact that they are still very much behind McLaren. They are very much at least running rings around Mercedes at the moment, and Red Bull, it's going to be a very awkward fight back to P3, but Ferrari are definitely the challengers at the moment. But I am pretty sure that many of you Tifosi are just desperate for a win. Just one. Just one. And now, of course, the TV directors didn't pay much attention to Alex Albon's achievement in Q3, but we certainly paid attention, the loyal fans, because that P5 from Alex was absolutely incredible, and we didn't get to see it until afterwards, when the socials caught up. And that was the team's best qualifying result of the year! Because it was an interesting little switcheroo affair for Williams. Saturday was Carlos's day with P6 in the sprint, and then Sunday was Alex's time to shine. Because he lost out to Russell in the wet phase, yes, but that was to be expected considering the Williams still lacks ultimate grip. 6th place for Williams is not too shabby at all to mirror what Carlos was able to do, but that was resulting in 8 points on Sunday to Carlos's 3. And we managed to see a repeat of what happened in Australia, in that Lewis Hamilton was stuck to the back of the Thai Brit driver. So it just goes to show what happened in Melbourne was not a fluke. It has been repeatable, in that Albon was able to annoy a Ferrari. It really goes to show that Alex is in the form of his life right now, and it goes to show that the little update they did bring for Spa has done something to improve the car, and at least mean they don't have to compromise in much of cooling. But let's not forget here, this was a very cool Spa, as in relatively chill in terms of temperature, and there was a lot of water to bring down the engine temperatures as well. So we've got to make sure that these little updates are being able to do something when it's a little bit warmer and a little bit drier that we might get in Budapest. So this might not be a cure-all, but it might be at least a little bit of hope that they managed to bodge something together, which means they're not going to get yet another DNF due to the power unit. And then next up, we gotta give Liam Lawson some credit, because this is yet another time, like in Austria, where he was able to provide the Red Bull group at least a little bit extra positivity, with a very solid result with yet more points. But in terms of the points tally, Isaac's on 22, Liam's on 16. He's catching up, the Kiwi. And then when Hadjar was compromised due to a technical issue, Lawson was able to step up and bring the team at least some points, to complement the singular point that Isaac got in the sprint. And as the Saubers were briefly deciding who had track priority, it allowed Liam to build a gap, and from there, Alan Permain called it a near-perfect race, and that maybe things at Red Bull Racing were a lot more complicated than we thought at the time. Because it's Liam keeping VCarb in contention for 6th place in the Constructors at the moment, while Isaac Hadjar himself, like with Antonelli, is going through a bit of a lean spell, and unfortunately some technical maladies befalling him. It's a very tricky situation for Isaac in terms of his confidence in his rookie season, but that does not discredit all the stuff he's been able to achieve thus far. It's just meaning that Liam is now showing up to the party to be able to provide some bit of heavy lifting. And maybe this might be enough to convince the likes of Laura Mekis and the Red Bull Group themselves to maintain both lineups for 2026, since it's looking likely Verstappen's going to be locked in for 2026, and then maybe Tsunoda might be given yet another season himself. Could the same thing be afforded to Hadjar and Lawson? And then maybe Arvid gets another year in F2, providing he doesn't win the championship? Because I really think another season with Lawson and Hadjar together building this team, this could be really good and provide Red Bull a really good long-term stable driver lineup. And it means it puts far less pressure on all the youngsters coming through. And then we move on to my other boy Bortoleto, because hey, he's got more points! And he nearly managed to get at least a cheeky point in the sprint. P9 there, P9 in the race, woof! Very, very nice. And more importantly, he's getting really, really feisty, because we got some team orders at Sauber, and then swapping positions. Oh, the confidence on this Brazilian boy, it's just going up astronomically quick. He had another Q3 appearance, and he is very much showing his own against another midfield favourite in Nico Hulkenberg. And let's not forget, people, this Sauber is actually a fairly solid midfield contender, so I think we can stop with the tractor analogies right now. And yes, you might be thinking, well, what is he getting ideas above his station with asking to swap positions? Well, it did turn out he was ultimately that little bit quicker than Hulkenberg, but unfortunately, even he couldn't get past the New Zealander, and he was relegated to 9th, so that pretty much was the ceiling for the Sauber that weekend, but it's still another couple of points to their name. Arguably, had it not been for Gabriel's efforts, then VCarb would have overtaken them for 6th place in the Constructors. So you gotta give these two some credit, Nico and Gabriel. They are turning Sauber around really, really quickly as they're getting prepared to becoming Audi. And it's really clear that this kid is no longer anonymous in this grid, and that he's able to provide something, because he's not that far behind Behrman in the standings, and arguably he's had the weaker car for the majority of the season. I told you to watch Gabby. And I am going to mention Lewis Hamilton in the winners. You might be thinking I'm being generous here since, well, his Saturday was absolutely terrible. Yes, you are absolutely right. But you got to think about this from the context of the entire season, where Lewis has been very much down in the dumps. He managed to come back from starting in the pit lane effectively, then a rolling start, they tweak the setup, and then he's able to do that, going from 18th to 7th. The clear driver of the day, and well deserving of that too. And yes, of course, you might be thinking, well, surely he'd be able to get higher and beat Alex Albon. Well, you gotta remember what they did with the setup according to what Ferrari and Lewis said. That's sure, it did rise to Ferrari to the point where he was able to take 3 cars in 1 lap, but once he got to the back of Albon's gearbox, that was pretty much it, because that relatively high downforce setup I believe he took, it had met its match against the Williams going for the top-end high speed. Although Lewis did admit that his Saturday efforts were unacceptable. It does make you wonder what might have been capable for him had his Q1 time stuck and it wasn't deleted due to track limits. And then there's Pierre Gasly. This was a bit of a roller coaster weekend, but it did result in another win for him, albeit a very, very little one this time out. He couldn't start the sprint race, I think due to a water leak. He then did get out for a couple of laps and then retired again. But he and Colapinto treated the sprint race, since they weren't going to be scoring points anytime soon, as a bit of an extended test session, them having to rely on top-end speed to make up for the fact that the Renault engine is incredibly weak, especially around a power circuit like Spa. This is what you got to remember, folks. This Alpine car with the Renault engine is anemic in terms of top-end speed, and he was able to get a point. That's not too bad. That is a positive, gargantuan victory for the Frenchman. And also, this has got to be something that was sweet for him, because this track means a lot to Pierre because of what happened with Antoine Hubert, his friend, his traditions that he has. It's significant for the Gasly. And then, just to top it all off, him wearing Antoine's cap for the whole weekend. Oh man, that was beautiful. That was absolutely beautiful. And then we get to the mess section, and Lando Norris starts this off. And you might think this is unfair of me to cast him into this section for today, but this was a race in which Norris simply looked far less confident, despite his pole on effective home soil. And yes, he did net a sprint P3 after repassing Leclerc and pressuring Verstappen and Piastri, but like his teammate, he ran out of top speed because he had too much grip. Now, he did get what he wanted for the start, which was a rolling start, which meant that there wasn't any means of high pressure stakes with a traditional formation lap and then the start going into La Source, so it did remove some jeopardy there. But unfortunately, I think he had a little bit of a wobble in La Source, and then again, his battery was spluttering in and out of life, which did not help the push up to the likes of Eau Rouge, Radion, and then down the Camel Straight, which left him a little bit of a sitting duck when it came to Oscar Piastri. And then after that, Piastri was gone. From there, it was just a case of counterattacks. Lando had to come up with something to be able to counter what Piastri was able to offer. And that idea from McLaren to alternate the strategies. Oscar goes with the conventional medium, Lando goes for the hard. It was a bold move, and it did work. It was a good strategy. It helped out Lando considerably and meant that Leclerc had nothing to respond with. But then I look back to what Brundle suggested, and this was a really valid point, that maybe had Lando given up a couple of seconds, then McLaren might have been able to pull off a easy double stack without that much complication and that much danger. But unfortunately, I don't think Lando was prepared to do that for the fact that, well, you're giving up distance between your competitor. So that's not, I think, a competitive driver would want to do. And then, of course, he did have a sticky front left, which certainly didn't help. So that was a mistake on the team's part, but then you just got to look at the fight back itself. With more optimum tyres, with Oscar having to very much play damage control on those mediums, the C3s, you think this would have been a cakewalk for Lando. But unfortunately, it wasn't to be. He ultimately lost a good few seconds, which meant that Oscar had a little bit more breathing space. He didn't have to manage quite as hard, was able to respond. Yes, it did get the gap to within 3 seconds, but those 3 or 4 seconds lost of time behind Piastri, considerably behind Piastri, to the point where Dirtier's not really going to affect the Brit, meant that there wasn't really any sense of danger to be had. That these were all unforced errors that needn't have happened. And again, lockups can really affect that fight back, because if he hadn't have had them, I think he would have been right up the chuff of Piastri and really putting on the pressure. Oscar wouldn't have had a leg to stand on. This could have been a win to mean that he would have had a hat-trick, Lando. It didn't happen. You might again think I'm being harsh here, but this is the reality. Yes, a second place is still good. It's good damage limitation. But all of the work from Austria and Silverstone has been mitigated somewhat, with now him 16 points behind. And also, there were some positives to be had here, because Max Verstappen, so you just got to look back to last year's Lando, and if you told him that just 12 months in the future, you'd be 70 points ahead Verstappen, he'd be like, I'll take that. But in terms of contesting the other McLaren, it just simply wasn't clean, and he had the ideal tyres as well, just what might have been. As Lando said himself, shoulda, woulda, coulda. And then Verstappen is in this list, and after a seismic shift in leadership for the team, I would say this wasn't a bad weekend, because they did execute the sprint perfectly with a skinny rear wing. And Max cleared Piastri on lap 1, managed the battery and traction to win. It's a very big morale boost. This wasn't a catastrophic meh, it was just not quite enough to be a winner's party because, well, he didn't win the race on Sunday, because the team did add downforce anticipating a wet race, and that could have been a masterstroke had the delay not happened. Because seriously, what was with that delay? It was absolutely unnecessary, and maybe Verstappen would have had a shout in getting closer to the McLarens. Or at the very least would have overtaken Leclerc. And then you look to the body language of Verstappen, he wasn't overly frustrated with these loss. He simply just realised that the car was simply not there, that the upgrades weren't quite the magic bullet that they all hoped for. But they did provide a little bit more progress in terms of lap time than previous updates have been as of late. So it is going in the right direction. And as I mentioned earlier, Verstappen is locked into Red Bull next year. So now the game is all about making good of what you can this year to then be a good springboard for next year. But hey, if you can come away with a sprint win and a decent chunk of points, you've got to remember, Max has come away from this race with 20 points, and he has very much secured third place that little bit more from Russell. This wasn't a terrible weekend at all. Certainly not a loser situation, but it wasn't the greatest. And speaking of Saturday, it was certainly a high for Haas, hence why they meet in the middle, because their Sunday was quite sad. That double points finish in the sprint, that was valuable in preventing the team from slipping out of midfield contention and remaining stuck in ninth, because race execution did slip into the equation again. With the car that quick, Haas probably left Spa feeling they should have scored in both races. I think this is the fourth race in a row where he's been the bridesmaid but never the bride in terms of pointage. You gotta give praise to Oliver for consistency's sake. I mean, that is something. And then, of course, P7 in the sprint for him, P5 for Ocon, his second P5 of the season. Not too shabby, they came away with something. But Komatsu himself admitted that this simply was not good enough in terms of what the team did. They let the drivers down in what they did. Pit stop calls were simply not at the right time for either driver, and they were the bigger victims of all of the shuffling around over the crossover. And then I think a brief engine issue scuppered Oliver's progress. I think he dropped a few places. That meant he had no chance of leapfrogging Gasly or maybe taking out Bortoleto. It might have been a straight fight between Liam and Oliver. Make no mistake, this Haas car, this upgrade they brought for the British Grand Prix, is working. It's providing the team something. It's just they need to catch up in terms of their efforts when it comes to actually delivering on the race itself. So I'm certainly not going to call them a loser because, again, they came away with 6 points. That's not too shabby. It means they are just on the cusp of taking out Aston Martin for 8th place in the Constructors. Sure, it's not where they probably want to be, but let's not forget, they are only maybe 8 points behind 6th. They're still in it. And then there's Nico Hulkenberg. Saturday definitely went awry because he had a tangle with Stroll, I think, and it damaged his front wing. And then in the race, he read the crossover perfectly, jumping into the points for a little bit, but then higher downforce setups, what have you, what like we saw with many other cars, front tyre drop-off as well. They had a lot of tyre deg issues. It meant that he had to stop for a second time. And then, of course, he then had to swap the positions with Gabriel. Yeah, it wasn't going to be a fairy tale weekend like we saw at Silverstone because at Spa, it did dry up a lot more quickly. And yeah, I'm not going to lie, based on what Sauber was saying, they were definitely going for a gamble. They were going for a suck it and see situation. And that maybe put Nico on some fresher tyres and he might be able to scythe through everything. Another burn from the stern like he's been able to prove quite a few times this season. But unfortunately, they didn't take into account the Garde de Gasly. As in, P10, he was holding up everybody. Because these DRS trains, man, they are an absolute punisher. And I've now started to see comments, like we saw at Suzuka, about people going, oh yeah, maybe we should drop Spa because it's not great for the racing. Oh, it's so boring. It's oh my god, no. It's the car's issue. We thought ground effect would solve things, but these pesky F1 engineers are too good at their job. They've made the situation where you can't follow a car with a typical template which is meant to make the racing much closer. So yes, Spa is definitely fit for purpose. Stop it. And then talking about Tsunoda, we've just got to give Yuki some credit because Saturday was the best he's looked in that car since he joined the senior team, and that's why I'm going to go easy on him. This was a major turning point, and I've seen so many people just look at the results themselves and misinterpret them. Sure, Yuki did finish P13, and that was extremely unfortunate, but you do have to look at the circumstances which got him there. Because Laurent Mekies himself, the guy who then suddenly went, oh hey, I know, why don't we, instead of hoard that floor for Verstappen because he's not going to break his floor, put it on Yuki's car and see what happens. Oh, would you look at that? Both Red Bulls in the top 10. How about that? And then Mekies was about to attempt a double stack. Well, okay, Max and Yuki weren't that close. A double stop, so at the same time, because there was a big enough gap. But unfortunately, Yuki got the radio call, according to Mekies, a little bit too late. He passed the pit lane entry, and then he had to go around again, and it's a very long lap, so therefore he was compromised, and then he just got completely bolted right down from the points paying positions to, I think, 14th, 15th, and then had to make a fight back. So it was just completely not his day. And all of this at his 100th Grand Prix as well, stuck again at the Gare de Gasly. So yes, the reason why Yuki is down here is nothing of his own doing. He got stuck behind traffic, so, you know, the whole dirty air thing compromised him, like it did with many other drivers, and then Mekies himself just went like, look, it was an operational error, we're terribly sorry, we didn't mean for this to happen to Yuki, but you just gotta look at what happened on Saturday. Once put on the right parts, and them both, the Red Bull drivers, given a fair opportunity, he was only a few tenths behind Verstappen. Sure, it's a notable gap, but 4th and 7th for both drivers, that's still good, and Max might be like, hey, cool, I got a wingman again. And that maybe Red Bull might be in a position where they can at least try and fight back and get 3rd place in the Constructors from Mercedes. And speaking of, because Mercedes start us off, oh dear. This was not a good weekend for them at all. The lowest going front-running team of all. Sure, Sunday was better for Russell at least, almost attempting a charge for 4th, but Max was simply too strong for George on this occasion. It was a case of making up for what happened on Saturday because the conditions surprisingly did not work out for Mercedes at all, despite the fact that the W16 likes cooler conditions. Yes, on Sunday, George Russell did secure a top 5 finish, again, but it was a pretty lonely affair. He did leapfrog Alex, but that was it. That was pretty much what the W16 was capable of. And then you got to look to what happened to Antonelli, and oh dear, this was a weekend to forget, to the point where he was on the verge of tears, surely. But fortunately, the F1 fandom and community is very much going, there, Kimi, it's okay. Because it's understandable all the pressure that he's going through at the moment, but then to be fair, when the car was set up for the wet, and then Kimi was on the wet tyres, he was actually making some progress. He was definitely holding his own. But then things, as we saw with many other drivers, got dry, and then the setup wasn't ideal, so he had to basically go in and do it all over again. Him mostly spending battles with Ocon. It did look a little bit more composed than it has been in recent races. He did finish it at the very least, but you do feel like Antonelli is struggling to try and get some equilibrium back again. But he's hoping that it might redress itself around Hungary, perhaps. But make no mistake, this is not the result that Toto probably wanted from either of his drivers. But hey, at least they're not Aston Martin, because my God, that weekend was bleak. And I thought they brought updates. What the hell happened? The team dubbed the qualifying result of theirs as the worst in the team's history. Both cars on the last row for the race itself. They did go on to split strategies, hoping for places gained as the crossover happened, but again, thanks to the long delay, it didn't convert into maybe a P11 or maybe a single point. And Lance Stroll did make some progress to get up to P14 because I think he went with a 1-stop or something, but Fernando, oh, he was all over the place. He did a 2-stop, he got shuffled around, he did make some progress to get up to 13th at one point, but then fell back to 17th. It just was a really shoddy weekend for this team, and they almost had no clue as to what was happening. But maybe that it's not because the car was terrible, it might have just been down to them simply, Aston Martin, not getting the execution down pat to the way that they would want. So we will just have to see what happens in Hungary, and hopefully these updates they brought are not going to be yet another Imola 2024. Because make no mistake, this was absolutely disastrous for them. And then for Isaac, Saturday was fairly okay. It was a single point to his name, so that was definitely something. But then, oh my, Sunday, absolutely terrible. And this was beyond his control. Let's not forget this. This was a technical issue that happened near the start of the race, so there wasn't really much he could do. He was stopping so many times, I was thinking, sure, he's not burning through these tyres that much on its own. Well, turns out it wasn't. And to rub salt into the wound, it's Liam Lawson, once again, like it was in Austria, who's bringing in quite sizable points. Another 8th place. Liam is catching up in the championship, so that momentum that Isaac had at the beginning of the season is starting to wane. Maybe the long length of the racing calendar is starting to get to the Frenchman. No disrespect to what he's been able to do so far this season, Isaac's definitely made himself a worthy Formula 1 driver, don't get me wrong. Saturday, Isaac was probably beaming after getting a singular point and joining his teammate in Q3. All 4 Red Bull cars in Q3, and he was a part of it. He should have been absolutely thrilled and maybe hoping, hey, I can get some more points. Maybe Racing Bulls will be 6th place at the end of all this, but no, it wasn't. It was up to Liam to be able to hold the fort. And yeah, it was just really bad luck. It was just technical gremlins, really. That's why he's down here. It's nothing to do with performance. It's down to him just not having the car. And then, oh my god, Carlos Sainz. The same thing happened to him, because on Saturday, he was coming home with some good points, whilst Alex Albon was languishing down in the lower positions. And then come Sunday, it's flipped around again, where Alex is bringing home the bacon, and everything bad that could possibly happen to Carlos happened to him. So you remember the analogy he said that everything that could go possibly wrong with your race just happened to me? Well, it's happened again. The weekend unravelled badly after the sprint, comically so, because after that, the team then committed to a bigger rear wing in case of rain and to make up for the fact that Carlos was going to start 15th. And then another tweak saw him start from the pit lane, then the race drive too quickly for that choice to do anything worthwhile, then he had a slow pit stop, I think, which added to the damage, and then he had to do another stop in search of pace, never escaped traffic, so yeah, it was another example of just Carlos having everything bad happening to him. Yeah, he's been able to score some points, and in the sprint on Saturday, he looked really, really solid. But then afterwards, it just all fell down. Really laughably so. Seriously, Carlos was extremely unlucky in this situation. Everything that could happen did happen to him. He's not kidding, folks. He's not kidding. And then for Colapinto, unfortunately, this was a very downbeat weekend for him. He started the sprint from the pit lane after rear wing changes, and like with Gasly's own technical issues, used the session as an extended test time. And then Alpine, I think, mirrored Gasly's low drag strategy in being able to give him a little bit more top speed to be able to defend from people behind him, or maybe make some inroads to the people ahead of him, but it simply just did not convert. It did early in the wet, but then when it got dry again, yet again, like many other drivers, he just didn't have the car in being able to go racing. I do think Franco is gaining more confidence steadily, but the car is simply not giving him what he needs, and I am seriously, in the English-speaking circles, seeing a lot of momentum against him. And speaking of giving a break or patience, I may or may not be around for the next few days, because I might be doing something really cool in Hungary, which I might be able to share with you. It really depends on what I can do in terms of logistics. So things will become clear in the fullness of time, I'm just giving you a heads up. But in the meantime, let's reflect on the situation with Max and Mercedes. Whilst Red Bull and Max are getting their head down and keeping quiet, it's Toto's team who are keeping the headlines ticking over. To find out why I think it's Mercedes who are stirring the pot right now, watch this video next, straight after this one.